Growing session. This is going to be a chance to have a reasoned and rationed debate without emotion, hopefully, and not personal. And we're very fortunate to have some great panelists here. So perhaps if I could call up the panelists, and then I will introduce you as you've sat down. I'll give you a moment just to introduce yourselves there. So could I just call you up collectively, and then I'll do introductions, individual introductions as we go forward. Just sit wherever. I think Zerkali on one. We mix. Let's have Zerkali on this side as well. One on this side. Let's split you up. Yeah. Great. Kajitumbo as well. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Wonderful. Good. Well, thank you all very much for coming. And there's a few people who haven't been able to come, and we'll fill in those spaces as best we can. But I think looking at this, we have a good representation of interests in the industry and quite divergent views. So perhaps maybe if we start with Kajitumbo, just basically a brief introduction of who you are, what you're doing in the industry, or related to the film industry, and just a one line about your view about the subject, which of course is freedom of expression in the film industry vis-a-vis Kenya.
Thank you. Thank you. I am Kajiton Boy. I am the chair of the Kenya Script Writers Guild, and I'm also an independent filmmaker. My one sentence on the topic of freedom of expression, I think there is too much curtailing of freedom of expression for us to be creative enough.
Good afternoon. My name is Mike Omboro. I work with an organization called Kwani Trust, where we work with young upcoming writers. And we are in the industry of promoting Kenyan, fresh, new upcoming writers. And about today's topic, I think the freedom of film and anything that's produced out of film should come from law there where the writing starts. And as Kwani, we want to nurture and present the writers that will produce the free talking movies that are going to represent the true Kenya.
Good afternoon. I am David Omoyo, the CEO of the Media Council of Kenya. We are the custodians of the sacred principle of self-regulation. So our perspective is that film is not a business. It is a critical form of communication and mobilization of communities, and so it should be protected under the same principles that freedom of the media is protected.
Hi, my name is Sarah Moihaki. I'm an award-winning filmmaker. I believe freedom is necessary when making films, because we talk about our society as a society is, so we should be free to express the society that we live in.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr. Ezekiel Mutua, CEO, Kenya Film Classification Board, and Mr. Chairman, in respect to the topic of today, I'll summarize it by a quote that was given by a South African judge in a major media case some years back, early 2000. And he said, the salad of a journalist must have both the oil of freedom and the vinegar of responsibility. And those two must be applied, proportionately. Failure to which disastrous consequences will follow. So I believe in freedom of creativity, in freedom of expression, but freedom must go hand in hand with the responsibility. There is no absolute freedom. And where there is absolute freedom, that is a recipe for chaos. And so what we do as a Kenya Film Classification Board is, I would liken it, I would give the analogy of the road, where there are cars passing, and the motorists have the right to drive home and go where they want to go. But where there is congestion and there is heavy traffic, It is in the interest of the motorists to have policemen manning the road. When you block one another, when you crash, when there's a problem, and the work of the government should just be like that traffic policeman who will help the traffic to flow, not to stop.
Thank you very much indeed. I think a couple of things before we start the discussion. Some house rules. This applies as well. We're going to have a section at the end where you can ask questions. Hopefully we'll have 15-20 minutes for that. But both for the audience and for the panelists, I think we're all mature adults, so let's keep the conversation mature, not personal, and try and keep it as unemotive as possible, respect each other's divergent views. I know this is something that gets people rankled a lot. I'm in a unique position that many of you know my views, but as you know, when you're moderating or when you're chairing, your views are not there to be heard. I'm here to make sure it's facilitated and flows nicely. And if you think I'm partial one way or the other, I apologize in advance, and I hope I won't be. I will also, if it's all right, panelists, refer to you by your first names. If that's all right, it just makes life a little bit easier with your permission. So I think the first thing, let's just start, and we will try and give everybody an opportunity to reply to some of the questions, have some discourse. If I do interrupt you, please respect that. It's just purely for a matter of time to make sure that everyone gets a slice of the clock. I think the first question, and Ezekiel, you touched upon it, is would you all agree that freedom of expression is a cornerstone to our democracy, but it is not an absolute right? And perhaps, Cajun Boy, if you could start with that. And if I could, as you answer that, if you happen to agree that it's not an absolute right, what limits should the authorities, the state, the laws put on that, if any?
Thank you. In my view, the only limit on freedom of expression...
Can I interrupt 1 second? Sound-wise, I think this side we have stronger sound than that side. Is that something you can correct? This is already the censorship starting, I think.
Hello.
Is that better? Can you hear what they're saying
hello
now?
Hello. Hello. Better? 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 Thank you. In my view, I think the only thing that should be curtailing freedom of expression is when you talk about things like incitement, things like hate speech. I think whereby a person is giving their opinion of how they perceive something without inciting the other members of the community to go against another community, I do not see why there should be any reason stopping them from saying it. I do believe that is the only time when there's a risk to another person, a person's life and limb or maybe property, that freedom of expression should be considered being curtailed.
I agree with Kajetan fully, but also just to add, when it comes to creating any content and you want freedom to start from the low level where the writer is writing a particular concept, and most of the time I always tell filmmakers that the content that comes from your film always comes from the surrounding that you live in. So you'll find a movie, for instance, let's say Nairobi Half-Life was a hit because the stories were stories we could relate with. And some of the writers who wrote in that film were writers who were workshopped in Kwani. And they came out telling the stories the way it is. We can say Nairobi is what it is not. With telling the writer to write a Nairobi that's different, that's curtailing their freedom of telling the true story about how Nairobi is. So I think as content creators, the writers, they should create content that tells the true story, and the true story of Kenya, which we can all see in movies, should never be stopped from being showcased to the people who are being targeted by those writers and filmmakers.
Is it better than that one? They say that, of course, freedom without responsibility is the prerogative of the harlot. I don't believe that anymore because I think harlots have more responsibility nowadays than any other freedoms. But the Constitution that guarantees freedoms of expression, of broadcasting and production of any content also specifies when that freedom can be curtailed. So I would insist that in case you want to curtail or regulate that freedom, you stick seriously to the Constitution, such that if you draw freedom from the Constitution, also if you want to regulate, stick to how the Constitution says that should be regulated. Because they also say that one man's meat is another man's poison. Most of the time when we have seen attempts to regulate or infringe on the right to express or right to produce or broadcast, it has never really been about interfering with the morals of society or perceptions, about a person or two in a seat of power or authority not liking what is that being produced. And I think that if we stuck to fidelity to the Constitution, the supreme law of the land, the issues of allowing freedom of expression and when that can be regulated is very clear. But most importantly is that you build the capacity for these producers to self-regulate, and so that we have very, very few cases where you have to come in and really remind them. Just like in football, the referee blows the whistle a few times, but all the footballers or the people in the pitch know the rules already, so that the guys know what they can do, what not to do. They know when to get on offside and all that. And I think in this, in the film industry, we should just build the capacity, and I hope our hosts here understand, build the capacity of all the producers to understand the rules of the game, so that we have less of us coming in to blow whistles and show red cards around the creativity field.
When freedom of expression needs to be curtailed. The reason I say this is something may be harmful when said to, say, a rowdy mob, but then will not be harmful when said in a panel, let's say, of friends or something. So usually, if it's going to cause harm, then, regulate it. But not because you want to stop a certain discourse. For instance, let's say the times of when we had one-party system and people were agitating for two parties. So if you write a film about two parties, and it's likely to not see the light of day, because that's a conversation that's being censored. Like, let's not have this conversation. So I think there are very few instances where freedom of expression should be curtailed.
Chair, I think I agree with my fellow panelists. Freedom of expression is a cardinal freedom. It's a fundamental right. It's enshrined in the Bill of Rights, and Chapter 4, freedom of expression, freedom of the media, access to information, all those rights are taken as fundamental rights. So crucial that they're in the Bill of Rights. And so I think we must agree with all of us, that the panelists seem to agree that those fundamental rights must therefore be curtailed in very clear parameters and in line with the Constitution. But allow me to go further and say, the Constitution is the principle, the major guideline. There are always laws that operationalize the Constitution. And those laws could have provisions that are thinking about the wider code of society, drawing from the major principle. And sometimes they can veer off. It happened with the Computer Misuse and Cybercrime Bill, where people went to court. They thought certain sections of that law were unconstitutional. They were actually suspended by the court. To the extent that we have a recourse in the courts of law, and we can seek, justice and clarity in interpretation of the laws operationalizing freedom of expression, we need not get worried unless we don't believe in the Constitution, or we don't have the capacity to exercise that right, number one. Number two, the philosophy behind the law is to protect the citizens. And I'll repeat the analogy I gave of the road. The traffic policeman is not there for their own good. In fact, they would rather they are not on the road unless they are taking bribes. It's not an easy work. They are there for the motorists to ensure that there is smooth flow. And the governments anywhere in the world exist to harmonize or to regulate the existence of human or the interaction of human beings or citizens. And therefore there will be laws that sometimes delve into those fundamental rights. The courts can call us to order where we make mistakes. But let us agree that we all pay allegiance to the Constitution. It is the guiding principle, but the operationalization laws might have issues on interpretation, and that depends on one party and the other, a lawyer and another. The courts of law will determine what is constitutional and what is not.
Good, thank you very much. We're going to go now into the stage where if somebody says something which you strongly agree or disagree with, do courteously inform them and let them know so you can counter that view or avert to it. I think something has come out very clear. We all believe in the Constitution. We believe in the fact it's a paramount document in our democracy. And the one thing that's come out very clearly in terms of this particular discussion on freedom of expression is the Constitution is very clear as to those times when you can limit freedom of expression. If I remember rightly, it's propagation of war, propagation of violence, propagation of hatred, vilification, hatred, ethnic hatred, and hate speech. Those 4 areas. Now, parking that aside, because I don't think there's anyone in this panel.
Can I shed some light?
Yes.
Article 24 of the Constitution provides actually for further limitation. And it says if you want to limit some freedoms, you know, as you operationalize the Constitution, it gives you a leeway to invoke Article 24 and introduce limitations. But it's very clear, they must be justifiable, reasonable, you know, they must be well thought out, and there must be public participation. In a democracy, the majority have their say, or their way. The minority have their say. This is how democracy works. And I do know, Chairman, if you want to be very specific to our area, you can make films, you can express yourselves as creatives as openly as you want. You know, as openly as you want. But there will be a regulator who will say, oh, things you have overexpressed yourself. They must speak to you using the law and the Constitution. If it's an existing law, don't blame the message. We need to change the law. Because it becomes very difficult sometimes when the regulators seem to be the problem and there's an existing law in the fashion, you know, changing the law. But then, as regulators, we are also human beings and we look at the way that good and context. I'll give you an example. There was a clip that came around when our soldiers were attacked in Somalia. And there was a terrorist, you know, don't in those, you know, bombs, muttering praises and looking very happy before it detonated and blew, you know, about 100 soldiers. And we were looking at it and saying this is a script from radicalization at its best. Do we allow a clip like that glorifies terrorism? Because that's the interpretation now. And that becomes dicey, because when I interpret that this delves into the area of radicalization, somebody else will say, no, this is a freedom of expression. And they have expressed themselves, and coming to what Bolo said, Nairobi half-life, Nairobi is presented this way, is what happened. But there could be certain portions of Nairobi that you may not want to show, like, and I'm giving that example where you don't want to show glorification or you don't want to praise terrorism, you don't want to glorify some vices in a film. It is true we can show robbery, it is true we can show terrorism, it is true we can show all these things, but where there seems to be an attempt to glorify, that's where we say the government cases might limit, but then we have a recourse in the Constitution and the courts.
Let me jump in. I think the regulators are working.
Could we get another microphone? Could somebody take this microphone and do some surgery on it whilst we're talking?
The regulators are working. We have a very thin line. For example, in the field of journalism, we talk about commitment to the truth. Did it happen or did it not? If it happened and you want to stop it from being shown, maybe it's justification that the people who did it will be happy that we've shown it. I don't think you're justified because it happened. You're now trying to conceal the truth. So you talk about Nairobi Half-Life. I have not watched it. I don't watch much, but I mean, are there parts of Nairobi where that takes place? Yes, there are. So refusing to show it, well, does it mean it stopped happening because you have not shown it? So they're all issues about, yes, you want to regulate, but if it is the truth, it is the truth. So if you could say, we have had a long discussion the past week that people are not dying, and we have all those threats and all that. I wouldn't want to get into that. The question is either whether we have famine or not whether we put it in the media or not. So it becomes a very complex issue. We did an analysis yesterday where we spoke about whether the figures are there or not. So you say by showing people dying, we are shaming our country and all that. But they are dead anyway. And dignity, what is the dignity of a man who has not had a meal for 10 days anyway? So you can put them wherever they are. So I think sometimes attempts to regulate turn out as attempts to conceal the truth. And that then goes entirely against people whose commitment is to truth and facts.
And by the time we are thinking about regulating.
Can you hear what he's saying? No.
By the time we are talking about regulating, which is going to take a long time before we decide we are not going to show that movie, there are people who are pirating the movies. And there are people who are already watching it, which means the creative person who created that content won't be making money at that particular time, which makes them feel so frustrated and they lose hope in the country where they should be making more money. And that's why they go out there and market their movies outside Kenya. But inside them, that's not their feeling. Their feeling is, I want this to be shown here. I want my people, I want my family, my friends to watch it. And I want to make money from the people who are watching it. So by the time we are thinking about regulating, let's also think, what impact does it have to that content producer, that filmmaker, that person who's invested so much money in creating that particular project? Because maybe that's why we don't even have some of our friends in this panel, because they feel this is not the panel they wanted to be in. Wanurika here was supposed to be here, why is she not here? I know she would have loved to be here. Maybe she feels this is not my space. She goes happily discussing her film outside Kenya, then she should be happy maybe discussing it here. We don't know unless we ask her. So we should also think that when we are thinking about regulation at the same time.
Good. I'm going to hang on to this purely because this is the driving wheel, steering wheel. We're down to one microphone now. So whilst we're doing this, could you put up your hand? This is like church. Could you put up your hand if you've got a seat next to you that's free? We're not taking up a tithing. Just put your hand up. I know there's a lot of people standing at the back. Keep your hands up, please. 1 second if you've got a seat next to you. Great. I think the fact we've got so many people here is a reflection of how important this issue is to everybody. Ezekiel, back to you. Yeah.
Chairman, I wanted to come back to what David said, and I'll talk about public interest. Filmmakers and journalists do not exist for themselves. They exist for the public. So, Wanaguru, if there's an overriding public interest, in fact, even the Code of Ethics and Practice of Journalism that David oversights, says the fundamental duty of a journalist is to write a balanced, actual, and a fair story on matters of public interest. And so the overriding public interest for the creative is fundamental. However, the reality is also that we have a culture and we have the wider good. And the wider good is not just determined by the journalist and the filmmaker, it's also determined by the government for harmonious existence of communities and people. Let me give you an example of the Americans. You will never see the blood of an American on TV. Reality is, they die like all of us. During September 11, they were affected like all of us. But unlike our cases, they don't show dead bodies of Americans sprawling on the floor. They don't quit. They protect the dignity of the American people, and they don't show that. So that today you have never seen that. And that's what I was saying, in the context of the Laden. Yes, there was a terror attack that affected our soldiers, and it is a reality. But we want to glorify that reality. We want to show it. And I'm saying this is just a conversation that we need to carry on but it must be based on the Constitution and the public interest, so that we take care of the public interest. Let me re-emphasize that filmmakers don't film for themselves. Journalists don't write for themselves. You write for the public. The government regulates what consumers of your content and your films will consume. And there's a law that governs that. So that the conversation cannot be you against the government. It should be what is good for us as Kenyans. What do we want to project, both locally and to the external world.
Good. I think, I know you're going to reply back to that. We're going to come on to a lot of points have been raised. I think the whole idea of self-regulation, independence of regulator, we'll come on to that, which you've raised as well, the Americans, that self-regulatory. But back to the point that Ezekiel mentioned about the provision under Section 4C of the Constitution, which says you can abrogate, you can change it, but it says if you're abrogating it, it cannot be to fundamentally change the right that you're abrogating it. All right. So this issue of war, many would argue, and I'd love to hear your views, that's covered by propaganda of war. That should not have been shown because the Constitution was very clear that that would cover propaganda of war, so we should not have shown that. But is it correct to say the government or the state should be able to bring in new limitations which are far-flung from the existing freedoms that we already exist? Can I just throw that back so we just recalibrate on that point? Kajan, answer your question, and then if we could follow up on that, please.
What I wanted to say was that
money has been poured. Take David's for the moment.
Well, I think it is wrong to use...
Can you hear him at the back? No. We're down to one microphone now. Is there... Could we perhaps have somebody from KFC up here just passing around the microphone? Because they're now silent on that side. It's just rather appropriate considering we're talking about freedom of expression. Are either of those working? Maybe take those two for surgery. Thank you very much.
I'm sure that terrorists and people spreading propaganda and pornographers do not go out to seek licenses for games. It is unfair to punish the hard-working filmmaker by making conditions so difficult. The people who bring these laws don't bother at any point.
Please. Okay, thank you. I think on that, let's just go back to this question of limitation. Because the Constitution is clear as to what freedoms can be limited and what freedoms cannot be limited. I'd throw it out there. What are those areas out with propaganda of war, ethnic, incitement, hate speech, etc., that you have issues with, that you feel the state has no business either regulating or having a say on what you produce? And conversely, why does the state feel that they should be involved in those areas?
I had the provision of the Constitution, especially when certain rights can be abrogated. I'll take an example of the United Kingdom, where they have a special memorandum of understanding between the media and the security agencies, where the country can mutually agree to temporarily, for example, suspend live coverage of a terrorist sin, or to avoid continuously revealing, maybe the police are doing investigations and all.
This is a D letter, the D letter you're talking about, where you, as a newspaper or media house, you apply to the court and say we need to show it for public good, in-camera sessions, and then you can or cannot, depending on what.
Yes, what they have is that they have a committee made of the security agencies and the media.
Yeah.
It's a committee that then determines that. In this case, we are going to withhold certain freedom to the media because either the police are doing investigations or it's an active shooting incident and all that. And that is usually mutually agreed. It's not government that comes and determines. It's mutually agreed that we have these reasons and we're going to. It's just like when you say police line do not cross, we will give an update for 1 hour. We may not broadcast live because a lot is happening and all that. That is mutually agreed when people are. And I would think that such issues like patriotism values and national pride is not a regulatory matter. I mean, it's about building a culture of pride and patriotism, and people really appreciate it. The Ubuntu they speak about. We cannot legislate patriotism. We cannot legislate even good values and morals. Really, you can't do that. So
ni mbovu kabisa, ni kama inachukua kutoka speakers.
Oh, una get feed kutoka hapa.
Kutoka hapa inaingia kwa kamera inaenda kwa YouTube.
Psycho sound.
Hold on please.
Okay.
You can't take someone to court that they were not patriotic because they showed a scene of a dead policeman. But if you have put in the set of values and all that, then people will appreciate and respect for the dead and all that. And that is there are no laws that you cannot show American episodes and all that, but there are certain sets of values and understanding that they have between the White House and the media. But certain matters that are not, you respect privacy and families and all that. So the challenge is not overriding, but encouraging the values.
Great. Sarah, you got some thoughts on this?
I was going to add, hello? Okay, so I was going to add on, like from Nairobi Half-Life, we were scared at one point. Closer, like that? Okay, so from writing Nairobi Half-Life, we were scared if the film was going to get a release in Kenya because we were telling a story that did not show Nairobi in good light. But this is the reality. This does happen. We are not saying there's no rundas and what have you and good, nice things happening, but this is the story we chose to tell. That was us telling this side of the story. Then what I would say, again, is when you watch things about New York, you want to go to New York. But in reality, New York is not a place you really want to go. You know, there's so many people and it's dirty and whatever it is. But then the films show you New York in such a good way that you want to go and visit there. So as a filmmaker, you can choose, do I want to tell the story that I want to tell, or am I marketing Nairobi? And that should be left to the filmmaker and not the regulator. And I think also you cannot regulate perception. No?
Yep. Good.
Thank you for that. Just, I think, important for the audience to know, we're going to involve you very shortly. I think we need to keep it on brief, which is how does it relate to the audiovisual industry? There's a whole conversation there about media. Today we're talking about the audiovisual. And I would just like to throw it out there before we go to the audience, and then we'll come back to us for some more questions, is it appropriate in terms of those limitations to talk about Kenyan values in terms of you guys as producers, in terms of the state protecting? In fact, interesting, when talking about the limitations, no one talked about children and so forth. The idea that in view of Kenyan values, there should be some remit for a regulator, whether they're independent or state-sponsored, to be involved.
Chairman, I wanted first to clarify what David was saying, that there are no laws that tell Americans what to show or what not to show. I think every jurisdiction has their own cultures, and their laws are based on their values. What do they want to protect? And I'll give you the example of Janet Jackson, indecent exposure, or the wardrobe malfunction. If that issue happened here in Kenya, I don't think it's a big deal to show a breast. Particularly when it's accidental on TV. Without this culture of my dress, my choice, it will probably not even bother me as a regulator. I'll let the media house deal with it. But the CBS was fined so heavily by FCC, and that matter dominated the debate for a long time, because Americans do not allow those kind of things. They encourage that you delay, you don't do real-time transmission, so that such things are not shown live on TV. And that's why we have the watershed period principle here in Kenya. There are certain things that we are classifiable elements that we say you know, certain levels of nudity or vulgar language cannot be, you know, scenes of that kind cannot appear. But I want to talk about the reality vis-a-vis values. And like I said, filmmakers are very critical to the national development narrative, and so are journalists. But you don't exist for yourselves, and that's why every time then we must look at the consumer. And who protects the consumer? The government anywhere in the world exists to do three things: to protect people's lives, property, and the values. And I do know that a lot of us don't want to look at the issues of values, but I can tell you the entire narrative about corruption, dishonesty, the senseless murders that we are seeing, they all have to do with our values. And therefore, film and the media should be encouraged. You may not want to put it in the law, and you may not want to curtail that freedom in the law. And we must all be captives of our constitution. But we must speak about where do we want to go as a country. Because media people do not exist, do not write stories. Journalists don't write stories for themselves. If you did that, then we say it's fine for the government should not interfere. But you are performing a public duty. I think it's very important. You are bringing your content to the public space. The government regulates the public space. It is not to curtail, it's not to control. And I think the conversation should be around, Chairman, should be the thin line between regulation and control. There will always be regulation. But that regulation can veer into control depending on the kind of leadership that you have in a country. But in a free democracy like ours, I wanted to encourage our film industry to know that there should be no fear. The issue of Rafiki, and you have raised it, Buru, we are in court. If the court rules that that film should be shown, it will be shown. So why are you fearing? Because we took actions in line with the law. Wanuri went to court, and by the way, contrary to what you think, she's a friend. We meet locally and abroad. She comes to our office. She is not an enemy. You are not an enemy. And there are no enemies. We are existing for you. And we are paid by your taxes. So we must also recognize that we are actually serving you. And so when there is an issue, let us change the law. Let us all collaborate, and quickly, like review of Cap 222, let us all collaborate and change it. So that the thin line between regulation and control is what we are looking at. But please always appreciate regulation, because if government pulled out, you'll have anarchy.
Good. Any other views on that before we go to the audience? I think one thing to clarify is the idea of who regulates. And I think there's a lot of confusion. Is it Communications Authority? Is it KFCB? Is it MCK? Is it independent bodies? Is it the courts? And also, obviously, under Section 34, when it talks about the freedoms there and the right to regulate them, it's very clear, as global best practice, it should be an independent regulatory body. Do we have that? Should we have that? And could you clarify, particularly the two members of government here, or quasi-government, as to who are the regulators and what role should they play, and are they indeed independent vis-a-vis our constitution and vis-a-vis international law?
I don't know that it's working. It isn't. One thing that I know clearly is, excuse me, I spoke earlier about aligning everything we do to the supreme law of the land. I can speak here without fear of contradiction that the regulatory agencies and the subsequent acts and gazette notices that have come out are in total contravention of the Constitution. The Constitution, Article 34, 33, 34, and 35 speak clearly about freedom of expression, freedom of the media, who should regulate and all that. Now what we have is a chaotic regulatory framework. Sometimes you go to a media house, and one time I wrote to a TV station about a fake news article about one of the witch doctors, Kamaliza from Busia, which is usually acted in a compound. And I went there and I found that they had a letter from CA, they had a letter from KFCB, and then I had done a letter to them and all that. And they were telling me, now we have a problem. Why do we broadcast something and everyone comes to us? And the truth is, all the regulatory agencies and laws in this country must be aligned to the Constitution and all that. We have overzealous, we individuals sitting in state corporations, and we have sometimes overstepped our mandate, either based by either the budgets we have or whatever season or the people who sit in our boards, and we have caused a lot of confusion in the people we deal with. So, yes, I would say that the Media Council's formation was contemplated in the Constitution Article 34(5)(b), independent of government, free from interference and all that. And that has been done. Even the Supreme Court reaffirmed in 2015 said the composition of the council, from the council and the people and all that, it is independent and should regulate. Their role was to set media standards and ensure compliance. Well, the discussion is about what then are these media standards and all that, because a few times we have felt people cross the line, and very many people cross the lines, the red line, the blue line, and there are many lines in this country. So I think, and I would propose that we need to clarify, underline all the regulatory agencies to avoid too many gray areas. We are confusing the public and the consumers, and that happens a lot.
I agree partly, Chair, with what David is saying. There is too much overlaps within government agencies. But let me say, there are core mandates for each regulatory agency, and then there are corresponding mandates for cross-jurisdictional overlaps. That can be sorted out administratively, Chair. The work of the Media Council of Kenya is not to regulate content. It is to arbitrate on cases, disputes, is to accredit journalists, is to promote professionalism. So that's my understanding. Let me just say what I think. CA issues licenses and manages the spectrum for broadcasters, internet service providers, telecommunications, and so on. The guys with the mandate of regulating what we watch and enforcing watershed is actually Kenya Film Classification Board, and there's no confusion. However, we agree our mandates are related. So we will always, just the same way we always have, between ourselves and Kenya Film Commission, there's always a thin line. And that is a healthy thing. It's not just in the film industry. You'll find it even among, I remember one time, CA, Communications Authority, and the competent authority had to go to court on the matter of market dominance. And the matter to be decided by court is not unique. Let us just agree that these mandates where there is overlap, we can sit together as government agencies and agree. But look at the core. If you look at the core, David, there is no confusion. You are principal. And I sat at the Media Council for 7 years, man. I am almost every word in that document. It's Ezekiel Mutua's document. I sat there for 7 years. So I know that thing. And you came the other day, you need to appraise yourself. The thing is that the core is not difficult to interpret. The convergences are very dicey. And the chairman, you are the best example that every time KFC and KFCB will always have those things. They are not because of Chris Food. They will always be there. But they can be sorted administratively. And that's why those regulatory agencies are put under one roof. You should not have another regulatory agency for the film or media coming in another ministry. So what I wanted to say is the law is what it is today. Some laws are no longer, they don't need to be in our statutes. There are portions even of Films and State Plays Act that are myself championing the repeal. And I could not even apply them myself. I say someone can take me to court because I know they don't make sense. And we have appealed to the industry to work with us to repeal them. Like having a policeman on the shoot. Unless you're using firearms, why must the law say you are accompanied by a policeman? There are a lot of things that don't make sense that we can align. We can deal with the gaps, the inconsistencies, but let us not say the law is not useful or the overlaps are completely unique to us. They are there in every sector.
I'm going to stop there. I know on that, David, I will put your words, you disagree. You can pick that conversation up. I think in fairness to the audience, we don't want to this now. When you speak to the various state agencies, and I had the pleasure of doing so, they're very clear about their mandates, and they're very clear about the fact that they feel all the other state agencies are infringing on them. So you've heard from KFCB, Communications Authority would differ, I know MCK would differ. So we'll leave that rest as it will be. I think the question relates to are they independent as set out in the Constitution, or do we do that? Can we move across to, we'll take 4 questions. All right, please, hang on 1 second before you hand over the microphone, Eric. Some basic rules. 4 questions, then we'll come back to the panel. Could we have questions, not statements? This is not your chance to have some group therapy and a stream of consciousness. All right, that can come later. Please just ask pertinent questions, and if you're particularly asking a particular person, name that person. Otherwise, I will fill it out as I see fit. Thank you. So, can we also do this? We'll take note of the questions, and then we'll come back and they'll fill them. So we'll take 4 questions, write them down, and then we'll respond.
Thank you, Chair, Moderator. I just have one question first to you, and just to say that I felt like we've actually really taken so long talking about media, and we are here mostly for freedom of expression and artistic expression. And I feel like media, journalism is actually quite separate, and I'm sure not so many journalists are here, not many media guys are here. These are filmmakers. Let's talk about freedom of expression, artistic expression on film. Then secondly, I also still feel, and it will be a question again to Ezekiel Mutua, when it comes to issues of regulation, classification, and censorship, who regulates, who classifies, who censors? Because those are 3 different functions being played by one body. And I'm actually trying to control myself quite a bit. Thank you. Then lastly, I feel also that we ought to actually remain on the space of what we are here for, because I heard David say he doesn't watch movies, he doesn't bother with movies, and that becomes a bit of a disturbing thing because he's sitting on the panel talking about film, artistic expression. Let's try to have people who have a feeling for what you're doing so that they also understand that we've been here long enough and we're struggling to survive in this industry for a reason. On the side of, again...
One question, so you've had 3, so can we just hand over the microphone?
Okay, but finally, please, let's also try to make sure that Ezekiel Mutua, my friend, please don't hog the space with media issues. Let's remain on the path so that we can actually deal with the issue of freedom of expression. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Could everyone kindly limit it to 1 question? I'll be brutal and cut you off after your 1 question. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My name is Josephine Oyombe. Unfortunately, I have 2 quick questions. The first one is for Dr. Ezekiel Mutua. How do you leverage regulation and empowerment of the creatives in the film industry? The second question to Sarah Mwihaki. In your productions, the film productions, what factors do you consider in terms of intellectual property aspects and tapping into the market? How comes Nairobi Half-Life is unfamiliar to other jurisdictions? Thank you.
Hello, my name is Sarah Thiriku. I'm a journalist. My question is to Mr. Ezekiel Mutua. First of all, Bona Mutua, hello. Hi. I wanted to say thank you so much. You're doing so much and you're doing so much good. Please don't feel that we are putting you down. You're doing a lot of good and we know that you're God's servant for that. My question to you is, please give us a summary of CAP 22A and what you want to achieve with it. But you're doing a good job. Please be encouraged.
One more question.
One. René from Audiovisual from the French Embassy. I just want to say that freedom of expression is a fundamental right in my country, and I don't think that France is a decadent country, as far as I know. Mr. Mutua, you gave an example of some footage that you saw with a terrorist smiling and being happy after killing people, and you say this film were glorifying. That's your interpretation. I think that showing this guy being happy after killing people could be even showing him as a monster. So the way you say it's glorify terrorism, no, you might be wrong. This is the way you interpret the picture. That's a first point. Second point, just a few words about Rafiki. I was in Cannes, you know me, you know that France supported this film. There was 8 minutes of standing ovation in Cannes for this film. And I'm not Kenyan, but I can tell you that the whole of Kenya should have been proud of having a film at the Cannes Film Festival for the first time in history. That's really a shame that the film was banned in its origin, in its country of origin, because really even when the film was screened here for the 7 days, I came back again for seeing the film, and most of the people leaving the hall was wondering why the film has been banned. There is nothing in this film that really deserve for the film to be banned. It's a love story, and the film is just a mirror of what is the Kenyan society today. So that's what film is. Film are reflecting the society. It was said by those people here. So that's what I wanted to say.
Good, thank you very much. We'll come back to you. We're going to let the panelists answer that. I think this is to do with that general question about media. I will try and steer it onto film and TV, but please be aware, audio-visual is not limited to film. All right? So if we park media, we would also have people saying, hang on, I'm a photojournalist, and this is my forum as well. So we'll try and be as balanced as we can on that.
I think let's just do, well, I'll throw it open to the panelists. If there any particular point you want to deal with it. If not, at the end, I'll farm it out again to somebody.
To reply to the gentleman who said that I don't want movies, so I shouldn't come here, maybe we need to understand what is the overarching principle that makes everybody come here, the freedom of expression, from which then the freedom of the press come down and all that. I will go back to what I said here, that anything we do must be anchored in the Constitution. Article 34(2) says the state shall not exercise control over or interfere with any person engaged in broadcasting or production, circulation of publication or dissemination of any information by any media. So it isn't about the media and all that, it's about, I think filmmakers are engaged in production and circulation and all that. So if we stick to that principle, we will not bother whether it is, because then the TV channel becomes a media, the cinema halls are a media, the YouTube and all that, or those who want to do streaming and all that. But if you stick around the principle that the state, or rather the regulatory agent, should not interfere with, remember the word is interfere with, unless as defined, we are breaking, it's about violence, glorifying violence, and all such matters. So I would like to stress that we are in agreement, and back to what we said, that the Constitution was very clear. It really contemplated, because there was a lot of public participation, about how people should express themselves via any media anyway, and that window when that can be interfered with. I think fidelity to that should be very clear, so that then the media of dissemination, whether in cinema halls, on YouTube and all that, is really secondary, but the content is the principle around which I think we're gathered here. Because I don't think that, because by getting that media, then we can get the films either screened in cinema halls or shown on a lot of free-to-air channels now that are licensed on digital platforms, or even put on YouTube and whatever. So the principle of freedom of expression now covers all that.
I also believe that they talked about the government agencies, that they have issues between themselves who's supposed to do what. I believe that when they are doing that, the time they should be taking with the filmmakers to know, some of the filmmakers that are in this hall or in this country, or some who are just in the village, are people who don't understand the laws that are required to be followed for them to do whatever they want to do with their film. All they have is content, and the content they have, they want to produce. But the infighting between them, they should take that and resolve that. And by the time the filmmaker or the content producers are creating something, the agencies should be also involved in training and helping the filmmaker, the content provider, to know what are the requirements of doing any movie in Kenya. Not at the end of it, when they produce something, that's when they are being told, no, this one can be shown here. That one will kill the morale of any upcoming artist or any upcoming producer who wants to build something or even create a movie in this country.
Might I try to understand how there can be such strong enforcement of a law that everybody agrees is contrary to the Constitution and is a cake? I try to understand that, and I still cannot reconcile that. And how overzealous enforcement of that law is supposed to help an up-and-coming filmmaker. Once I reconcile those two, I think I'll be in a better space.
Good. Sarah?
Someone, Mudamba, it was, that mentioned about regulation and whatever. So what I want to say is licensing and classification essentially should not fall in the same body.
because then you give me a license, I go, I film, put in a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of effort, then bring the story to you and it's banned. And I think banning also should not happen. Tell me that children cannot watch. This cannot be for under 18, because essentially adults can make decisions for themselves.
And I think Sarah, you're right. Safe to say that the law is what it is, and in fact, I would be sued by other. And you've had your namesake Sarah, who has praised us for doing a good job. There are many other people that all have different opinions. And so when we are looking at our stakeholders, we really treasure filmmakers, and we really support. Katichani, you'll agree that we are not as bad as you want to make us look. We really try as a regulator, because we exist for you. There is no regulation if the filmmakers are not producing. The thing is, we have a law, and that law is not made by Ezekiel Mutua. I found it. In fact, I'm trying to make it better. I'm trying to be more accommodating. If you see the work we've done, when I go to KFCB, we unbanned, the Wolf of the Wall Street, 50 Shades of Grey. I allowed the sequel, or I managed to lobby that we look at the sequel, 50 Shades Darker, in a different light, because the storyline was evolving, and allowed to show in Kenyan theaters for adults only. But like I said, the limitations, interpretation of the law will always, again, be based both on the Constitution and the law, but also on the individuals who are applying that law and the administrative operations. And if there's an issue, we can always seek solace in court. And I think we should not beat ourselves too hard about the regulation, because like the case of Rafiki, it's a classic example. Where your rights are violated, you go to court. I talked about the computer misuse and cybercrime bill was signed by the president 2 weeks later, was injected by the courts. It is always the practice of democracy. Peter is concerned about regulation, classification, and censorship. And I will say, yes, Peter, we are alive to the fact that CAP 222 is not really in the best form. Some of the sections, and I've said it myself, need to be looked at, and we are engaging in the process of reviewing that law. We are almost at the tail end, and then we'll open it up now for public participation. We've gone through stakeholder engagement. We have had different views, but like I said, we have different stakeholders. We have filmmakers, we have the consumers of the content, and in fact, as a regulator, our main focus is on the consumer, particularly children. And so there's a sense in which all of us must work together to make our laws better. I agree that probably we need to remove censorship. And in fact, we are evolving. If you remember, we used to be Kenya Film Censorship Board. Our counterparts in Nigeria, they are called Censorship Board. And the Nollywood is bigger than Kenya's. It's not really about the law or the lack thereof. It's about how people want to engage. It's how we want to build the industry, by reasonable engagement, by being accommodative of each other's views. Because in Nigeria, it is censorship, and Nollywood is the leading film industry. So it's not about the law. I would say we also need to change the way we engage with each other. All of us, and I'm not saying that we are not to blame in the government. There are things that we have not done right. We keep correcting ourselves. We do a very serious SWOT on ourselves and analyze the decisions that we take. And there's always a mechanism even for appeal in CAP 222, and this goes to the question for Sarah about CAP 222. When we make a decision, the minister is actually invited to look at the decision, and you can appeal to the minister. I've been to KFCB for more than 3 years. I've served under three different ministers, and none of them has ever brought a decision that he thought we took against the law. So these things are about engagement, interpretation, but the reality is we have a law called Films and Stage Plays Act that allows the board to do 3 things, and this is where censorship comes in: to approve, deny approval, or recommend excision of certain portions of a film. That's the way it is today. Going forward, I would like that we go the way Sarah is saying, that we remove the element of saying Wanuri should have deleted this, but restrict it to adults.
And I think that's, we are open to those. We want to listen to the other people and tell us, in the light of Kenyan culture and the other statutes, whether we want to allow films that promote gayism or homosexuality. That is a decision for Kenyans, not KFCB or Mutua. And I cannot even make that decision because you can sue me, and Wanuri has gone to court and we are waiting to see how it will go.
Thank you very much for that. I think before we go to the panel, I want to come back to you, the audience. I think one film which touches on many of the pertinent issues that you're here today is obviously Rafiki. And I haven't mentioned it till now because I don't want us to be focused, you know, a one-trick horse in terms of, a one-trick dog in terms of what we talk about. But I would like to ask the audience a little statement from each one of you, not each one of you, maybe 5 or 6 of you, because I know it's very diverse. All right, in view of the following. One, what the Constitution says about freedoms, particularly freedom against discrimination, dignity, conscience and opinion, freedom of expression, and freedom in the media on one side. All right? 2, linked with this whole conversation about Kenyan values. And it's always interesting when people say X is doing the work of God. We have different views on that. All right, Ezekiel, you know that. And I would like to, we're all doing God's work, but we differ on how we're doing God's work. I would love to ask you guys, what is your view on that? Particularly from an artistic point of view, do you feel the state has any role in that discussion? And specifically distinct between fiction and non-fiction? Should the state be involved in that? And if we could have five statements on that, I don't need a question, and then the panel can respond to those. Keep it short. If you go on a rant, I'll ask them to take the microphone away. Just keep it short. We know it's a nuanced conversation, but give your one little view about that, particularly fiction, non-fiction, Constitution, and your scripts.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Nick Njashe. I'm a filmmaker and also work for Machawood. I think my comment and maybe question about freedom of expression, especially through film, is this thing that we call national values. Is there a booklet that explains what national values are, and can that booklet be made available to all filmmakers so that we know when we are making a film that is going against the national values? The second thing is it's not African. Is there a booklet or some law that says that this is African and this is not African? Because again, all this information will help us make decisions, even as we write scripts, because this will educate us, and then we will know, oh, I can't write about this because this is not African. I cannot put this in here because this is not a national value. So those are the things that we need defined, because these things are thrown out always, everywhere. And then my final comment is this: fiction is normally created from what we see around us. You cannot write about something you have not experienced. So when you write, you delve into yourself, into your surrounding, into the people you see, and you come up with a script. It's a reflection of society. And regulating that reflection of society, I think we're doing a disservice to ourselves, because we are hiding. We cannot say that I am not white. I'm telling you, I'm not white. But I cannot tell people I'm white, can I? So we really need to speak truth. Lastly, I think we veered off the subject. When I read the booklet, it said that we shall be speaking about freedom of expression in filmmaking. And I think we veered off that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Tony Mwite. I run Clark & Hampton TV content and film distributorship. Mine was a question which was there previous before your suggestion. I would like to know, because we're talking about the classification, if we can have an idea of the volumes of films that have been classified and how many of those films have been banned, so that we can know the effect of if there's any cause for uproar or not. I'd like to know at what percentages are we dealing with. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other statements on artistic freedom?
Hi, my name is Arnold Mwanjela. I'm a filmmaker, writer, and director. Just to comment on what you asked about the role of the state and our voices. I think my question is, what if I am the solitary voice against what I think is unconstitutional, or what I think where I think the Constitution is wrong, or where I think the national values are wrong? What happens to my voice against this tyranny of the majority that you speak of in terms of the democracy? So how would the state protect my voice, given that I am a Kenyan? That's my challenge.
Thank you. One final question, please, or statement.
Hi, my name is Phoebe Rogora. I'll just make a statement. My point is that constitutionally, Kenya is not a religious state. So if Ezekiel Mutua is actually working for God, then maybe KFCB should be in the theological department. I feel like moving forward, in terms of talking about regulation, I don't see where the conversation is going, because one, even if you ban 50 Shades of Grey or you ban any movie, we can still watch it on Netflix, we can watch it online. So where is the future in terms of regulating the digital space? Because that's a conversation happening all around the world. Facebook is struggling with data and all that stuff. So where are we heading? That's just the question. And I also agree this should be more about film. I think film and media are two different things. And anyway, filmmakers, continue telling your stories.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody here, as we wrap up on that statement, anyone here who strongly believes that it is appropriate for the state to be involved in your storytelling? Okay, you've already said somebody. Somebody wants to say something who's very much in that line? All right, I think we're kind of one-sided here. I was just looking for some love for KFCB on this one. All right, we'll come on to that. I think what we're going to do, we're coming into land, I'm afraid. What I'd love is to go through the panelists. You've heard those statements. You've heard some of the previous questions. Could you limit it to 2 minutes maximum on, even 1 minute actually, because we're so short of time, on any of those statements that you really agree with or disagree with, or anything to one of the panelists that they have said that you agree or disagree with? Cajun.
What I'd like to just bring up is that as a script writer, I don't understand why KFCB want to look at the script and license or classify it, but what you want to call it. Because as a filmmaker, you realize that the script is a blueprint. There's going to be the input of the director, the input of the actors. I might write a scene that reads the couple kiss. The director might interpret it as a passionate kiss. So that if KFCB really want to classify a work, let them classify the finished product. It is a waste of time, energy, and effort for us to bring in a script, which we all know is just a blueprint. It's going to be added on by very many other factors of production. So that would help if they could just concentrate, if they must, on the finished product.
And as we regulate, I also want to say that we also need to move with the times. Times are changing. We are now on social media. 10 years ago, when we were doing the International Film Festival, there was no Twitter. But now there is Twitter, there is social media, there is YouTube. People can share movies. Dress codes are changing. We can tell people do movies in shukas because that's culture. People have seen many things. People have traveled and people are seeing the life changing. So the filmmaker of today is not comparable to the filmmaker of 10 years ago. So let them have the freedom they want to express in their movies. Let them write the way they see things as. Their movies will have Twitter handles in them. Their movies will have people conversing in different languages compared to 10 years ago. So the freedom also should change with the times as they come along. Because even people are watching movies everywhere. You don't have to watch on TV or on big screen. You can watch it anywhere. You can hack anything to watch it. So let the filmmaker be free to make the movies they want to make. And the upcoming writers and filmmakers, let them have the freedom to make and express themselves the way they feel like.
Okay, thank you. Let's try and keep it a little bit briefer. Sorry, David.
Yes. My word to the gentlemen and ladies film producers, and including KFC, we have to agree that the challenge in filmmaking in this country is not regulation. We need a fund, we need capacity, we need training, we need exposure. Forget about regulation. This video is itapita too. I mean, even technology is declaring most of us irrelevant. Guys, go out, think about how to get funds. As a challenge here. You're going on the KFC and KFCB. create funds, create marketing channels, create distribution channels, and let's not spend too much time speaking regulation. We can always override this from time to time. I think we agree that, about the 4 out of 5 scripts that were stopped, I think 4 of them got cleared somewhere. So I think regulation is not the challenge here. It's about facilitation to produce, be creative, and market. Let's put more energy in that and stop.
Good.
Yes.
Freedom of expression is crucial when telling our stories, be it film, be it media, like a news piece. And then also CAP 222, we all agree is archaic and it should not be used. Let it stop being enforced. As we all agree, it's archaic.
That is so strange. It is your law. CAP 222 is not a creation of KFCB. It is the law. The sooner we realize that laws are not there to control, they are for our own good. And I want to come to what Tony was saying, the question he asked, because I think it's substantive. The numbers do not lie. So I want to dispel the fears that we are overregulating, to the contrary, or killing creativity. To the contrary, not at all. Banning is not a unique case to Kenya. But let me come back to the statistics first. Last year, do you want me to answer?
1 minute.
Last year, we rated over 1,000 films submitted to us. Over 1,000. We licensed 519 films. Collected money from the license. There are statistics we can back up with other agencies, including the money we gave to Treasury as A&A arising from regulation. We banned 1 movie. In fact, we have banned only 1 movie for the last 3 years. You talk about overregulation, I think you live in your own world. The truth is, CAP 222, perception about it being archaic can only be addressed through review. But the law exists. It's like saying you don't need a traffic police. He will be there and will arrest you. I will arrest you if you film without a license.
Thank you very much. Happy note to end on there. Thank you very much, Ezekiel. I just want to say thank you very much. I'm afraid this conversation could carry on. There's so much to talk about. I hope it stimulated some thoughts there. You've heard both sides. I think you've all got various views on that spectrum as to where we ought to be and where we should be. I just want to thank our panelists. Thank you very much. You've given a sober view of the overview of this. Thank you, the audience. Could we have a round of applause, please, for our panelists? And I think we've been asked to move on because the next show is coming in. But thank you all very much for coming. Thank you for your questions. Thanks for keeping it civilized, and enjoy the rest of the market. Thank you all very much.